California, but well, I could say it. For those of you on a webcast, it's beautiful outside. So, anyway, my name is David Leibowitz. I'm managing partner of CH Potomac, and we are here for a panel with the lengthy title of Hybrid TV, delivering the ultimate TV experience, broadcast, cable, premium, and over-the-top content. And it is a lengthy title, but it also reflects what's been going on over the last few years, where we now are in an era of an abundance of programming, an abundance of content, an abundance or overabundance of platforms that seems to exponentially be growing with announcements daily, as well as an abundance of different devices for you to enjoy your content on. And they pose a lot of questions, but let me ask you some questions first. How many of you are cord cutters? How many of you have cut the cord? Okay, that's a decent number. Any cord nevers here? I had a feeling you might be one of them in the middle there, because you hit the right demo for that, but there are a few cord nevers here. And how many of you, well, I won't even ask about Netflix, because I'll probably get a lot of hands, or Hulu, I'll get a lot of hands. But how many of you are subscribers of NBC's CCO service, comedy service? No, none of those. How about CBS All Access? Okay, well, we got one, and I guess you're doing it because you're waiting for Star Trek?
Just because of the industry, but you know what, we fell into it and realized it was pretty awesome, the merge that they've done with the live and the broadcast on demand.
Well, that's going to, you seem like you're already gravitating into hybrid TV by saying, you know, the merge that they've done there. How about in terms of sticks like Chromecast? People using Chromecast here? Okay, and I assume others might have a Roku stick, Amazon Fire Stick, Apple TV. I see the same hands going up for all of those. But if you're in the business, you're using it for testing it, and you know, maybe you get some tax deductions by buying all of them and evaluating it. So that works out as well. What we're seeing, though, is that there's so much out there to watch on different devices. And you know, in terms of cord cutting, where it really has been accelerating, so that by 2018, the eMarketer believes that 21% of the U.S. households will not be subscribing to a cable or a satellite TV service, but they will certainly still have many, many ways to access the video content programming that they want to enjoy. As far as cord nevers, that, you know, has been something with millennials and others, but that also continues to grow. By the end of this year, almost 14% of U.S. adults will have never subscribed to cable or satellite services. Over-the-top services, as you know, since many of you have all those sticks that we talked about, there's so many of them out there. I mean, we talked about some of the large names, but when you go down Roku or these other ones, there are, you know, hundreds of different channels of programming to watch, and even trying to find your way and going through these is a challenge. And so, for example, and again, that's growing. I mean, by 2019, there's supposed to be 72% of all internet users will be watching over-the-top TV. And of course, you have over-the-top that's built into various TV sets as well as through PlayStation, Xbox, a variety of as even Blu-ray players have over-the-top capabilities these days. So when we go through all that, you know, we are all having new challenges that the program distributors are having in trying to maintain their customer base, grow their customer base, especially with challenges in cost. And cost is one of the reasons why, the primary reason why people are becoming cord cutters. And so there are now these skinny bundles, which are a fewer number of cable networks that will be added to a service. Originally, when I say cable, programming networks. It's almost a colloquial term to call them cable networks these days. But now we're having them coming out through a variety of different means like Sling TV, which creates their own skinny bundles of television programming that you could receive over the internet. They recently introduced a second skinny bundle, which is kind of interesting. One has the ABC Disney family of channels. The other one has Fox. And, you know, if you want to get both, I guess you need to go to get both of them or go somewhere else. There are now additional services that are, I guess, MCNs, multi-channel networks, that are providing, like Sling TV, or announcing that they're going to be providing additional channels like that. You have AT&T has offered one. Go90 by Verizon is out there. Hulu recently announced that they're going to be having a service, not just of the Hulu original programming and the programming that you're getting on demand, but the linear channel capability. And just yesterday or the day before, YouTube announced Unplugged, yet another one. And, you know, how they will be differentiating themselves is going to be a challenge, I think, as well. So when we look at all this, it still comes down to the fact that viewers still say that the top 4 television networks are essential to them. In fact, 71% of the cut-the-cord streamers view ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox as the most important things to have. You know, and certainly you'll have all these others. And interestingly, well, not interestingly, maybe obviously Netflix seems to be number 5 on that list. We're going to be talking about all of that, as well as the fact that there are these devices that are trying to combine your availability to access all these different sources of content through single devices, so-called hybrid TV. Some will have over-the-top cable as well as broadcast. Others, like TiVo's Romeo, that's giving you over-the-top and broadcast services. There's a new box by Evolution called eBox that's doing similar to that, but they're also relying on TiVo for their interface and their search capabilities. And to further complicate, or I guess the intent is to simplify the matter, the FCC now has a rulemaking to eliminate the requirements, or really to make greater freedom in building set-top boxes that could work with your cable operator or satellite operator or any other means you want to do it, as rather than being beholden to the cable company for the box in an effort to reduce the cost of it. But that is a very controversial subject that we're going to be talking about as well, especially when you look at the Motion Picture Association, the NCTA representing the cable industry, as well as some of the set-top box manufacturers like Aris like it the way it is. MPAA talks about the fact that there are going to be issues about content security. They're troubled about that. They're troubled about how in their deals with a cable MSO, they have certain channel placement features. There are other, contractual matters that they build into it that they fear is not going to translate as you move to a variety of different platforms to be able to receive that programming. Also, there's no real decision on how the standards are going to be set. I mean, there is going to be open standards groups, but how they're going to function, who's going to be participating on them, what review processes there might be, appeal process, certification processes. It's great for people like Jim Berger, who's a Washington communications lawyer and a copyright lawyer. For the rest of us, I don't think we're going to have to worry much about it, certainly not for a while, because even if the rules do go into effect, and President Obama has taken a very strong step in promoting it himself, that's going to be wound up in court for quite a while. So, again, something good for the lawyers. But we have a lot of people here who are non-lawyers, who really, have built work around the infrastructure of trying to make all this content available through these different devices, working on the challenges of trying to make it not just available, but that it's there, that you could find it when you want it, you could access it where you want it, and that you could other benefits out of that. So let me introduce my panel, and then we'll go from there. So on my immediate left Your right is Scott Robson, who's Vice President of Content Operations for Gracenote. Next to Scott is Anupam Gupta, who is EVP for Cloud and Product Services for Vubiquity. And next to Anupam is Nash Parker, who's Director of the IoT Ecosystem Development and Marketing and Corporate Affairs. I guess they're really putting a lot, and that's all for Nokia. So
you think the Victor
I don't know
would
if
be really more efficient?
well, I think Victor's helping them write the titles for their team too. So that could have something to do with it. Robin Wilson, who is VP of Business Development for Nagra, is next to Nash, and Mike Earl, who's CEO of IOTV, and Mike will tell you all about IO, as they all will tell you about their companies too. Last but not least is Dr. Kanan Jamili, who is Chief Executive Officer of New Lion. And so why don't we start with each of you, and we'll start with Scott. Tell us a little bit about your company, how you fit into this ecosystem, what you're doing to make things better and more enjoyable for the consumer.
Okay. Well, Gracenote is the world's largest provider of metadata for entertainment, sports, movies, films, that sort of thing. Company's been around for quite a while. I only joined about 9-10 months ago, so I'm still peeling back layers on the onion. But what's nice to be on this panel is I think the work that Gracenote does in terms of enabling discoverability of content, attaching metadata to all these individual pieces of content, sort of threads across everything that everybody else on this panel does. So I feel like I'm a Swiss banker sitting up here, but that's sort of the short version of it.
All right. Swiss banker, eh?
Like that?
Well, I was actually thinking of a hybrid TV is like a Swiss Army knife, so it's good to have a Swiss banker up here to go with that. So
Swiss chocolate's coming for Sam for
that'll be good. Anupam?
Yeah, so Vubiquity is the largest provider of premium content services. So what that means is it's really the full spectrum of services from licensing to management of content to distribution to analytics, the whole thing. And the company has its roots in the MVPD, in the cable pay TV ecosystem, right? So obviously not a surprise, everything now is really about moving that to the multi-platform world, which I guess is in your definition of hybrid TV. It's already here, right, en masse. So what we find as a part of that now is content providers that we work with to get their content out everywhere. They're all about, hey, how do you help me with OTT? How do you help me with, not just the pay TV world, but also iTunes, etc. When we talk to distributors, if they're not on multi-platform devices, they all need help in that. And then we have all kinds of new OTT providers who are launching, and you referenced a bunch of those, that need help all the way from content provisioning to the technical solutions. That's where we fit in.
So you're basically sort of white labeling some of that stuff too?
Yeah, sure.
Because you're providing some of the content for those pieces.
Content services, white label, the whole spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Nash?
Okay, so Nokia, you might think about handsets and mobile phones, but it's bigger than that. We recently merged with Alcatel-Lucent, which is Bell Labs. So think of it as all your telecommunications now, whether it be landlines, mobile networks, and then the back-end access networks. Why is that important? Because one thing you could probably say about this entire process of all the different companies is they're all going to rely on a network to deliver those ones and O's and the content. And that opens up all sorts of different venues for what you can do with monitoring, analytic, upsells, and things like that. So what Nokia means by IoT and ecosystem development is we want to, as we get closer to a 5G, the next big standard, a lot of the architecture can be changed at this point. So what they've asked somebody like me to do is to go out and reach out to companies that will be affected by this, get input. So we have a program called ngconnect.org that does that, where we bring in companies and industries to help us design what the networks have to be able to accomplish, because we can't possibly know all that, and there's still time to make it better.
So, but I was curious about the title with the IoT on there and how that fits into this. So, I mean, you're sort of straddling across.
No, because if you really want to think about it, you went through a lot of the different devices that can deliver the content. We also brought up in our pre-meeting today about screen mirroring. So
Right.
there is so many delivery mechanisms, but in the end, they're all gonna need to work across a network efficiently and reliably against the changes that those networks are gonna have to handle. So let's just say like a 5G. If you're gonna have all this plethora of devices, the last thing that you're gonna want is a bad experience, because then you call AT&T, or you don't really call Hulu, do you? When Hulu doesn't work, you call Verizon. Then Verizon calls us because they say, hey, your stuff doesn't work. So it's in everybody's interest to make this stuff reliable and efficient, cost-effective, blah, 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 because we can see that the end customer is going to have requirements for all this, and all our companies are going to be affected by that. Does that make some sense? That
I think so. Does that make some sense?
yeah, Internet of Things is a terrible term, because it means too much to too many people. Think of it just more of how are all these devices going to reliably connect? And that's what we're trying to address.
That's good, because at first I thought maybe on my Nest thermostat I would go get a little
Yeah, I'm gonna
TV
watch my
screen there
Hulu
too.
on my Nest
so,
thermostat.
you know, so,
We're working with the Google does that.
at least I could see it on a refrigerator, you know, if it's a cooking show perhaps. But Robin, tell us about Nagra.
Well, since we mentioned Switzerland a few times, I think that's a good place to start. It's a Swiss-based company which actually has some advantages when it comes to cybersecurity and internet security. We started off as a conditional access, now DRM provider. We manage also the back end, do multiple DRMs, since one DRM these days is never going to be enough, and the security services. And we also do a bit of device software on occasions when just doing a DRM by itself isn't enough. I was invited to be part of this infamous FCC committee, which did the NPRM that you mentioned. There's now 3,000 pages of comments on it, including, filing from President Obama saying how nice it all is. But our scope of work wasn't to write the NPRM. Our scope of work was to do the preparatory work, and mine particularly was looking at security as a bottleneck or a lock-in, which I think is not an issue these days. The other issues, which I'm sure we're going to touch on, are metadata and ordering and who has permission to see what and why and where and when. But anyway, I did get involved in that, in writing the input document, which was then taken by the FCC, and they hugely embellished and changed it and wrote a notice of proposed rulemaking, not actual rule. So
Right.
a little aside there on what my day job entails occasionally.
So before going to Mike, I did sort of another question for all of you, and it's about the set-top box. For those of you who do have cable or satellite, and so not the cord cutters or the cord nevers, how many of you would be interested or anxious to replace your current set-top box and the payments you make for that with another device that maybe you'd pay one time because you would own it? And that's a pretty significant number. I'd say roughly, for those who couldn't see, especially if you're in the front rows, you're not turning around to see, maybe around 45% of you, which I'm a little surprised at, frankly. But, so I guess President Obama might be onto something there, but we shall see. Mike, tell us more.
AOTV builds what we're calling now a curation engine. So you can think of it as the natural next extension of what you might have heard as a term called a recommendation engine or a personalization engine. It's really designed to look at all of these sources of content that we're talking about that could come into this hybrid box or hybrid TV environment, and working with content owners and content distributors, finding new ways to surface all that content in relevant ways for you as the consumer. So with too much choice comes no opportunity to really make a decision. We're giving the tools to the people who make the content and distribute the content to take that in from multiple sources and surface that up through a thematic set of ideas and get that to you as a consumer, so you can actually watch TV instead of spending most of your time searching for it.
So could you give us a few examples of the new ways that you're working on or that you're now making available?
So think of the linear television that we're all talking about now as opposed to just the video-on-demand offerings. We're going to see more and more of that hit multiple devices with some of the services that you mentioned, David, with the Hulu and YouTube services and the ones that are out there the last year. Think of taking that and having a rational way to tie that to all of the video-on-demand that's available, even for free on the internet. So instead of that grid guide that we're all familiar with just being a listing of what's coming up in the future, what about tying each of those individual shows to something that's available on the internet? Red carpet interviews or making of interviews, things that you can tie thematically back to the programming we're all used to. Now we're bringing the two paradigms together. And in order for that to work, the metadata that sits behind each of those sources has to be consistent, it has to be rich, and it has to be normalized. So we do all of that work.
Interesting. Hi, Kanan.
Hello, David. All right. So New Line is a platform as a service company that also has a technology licensing activity inside for to process video, encoding, DRM, playback, and so forth on all devices almost out there. So we actually on the hybrid TV side, we actually have people like Tennis Channel in the US where they have a TVE authenticated channel that we actually power end-to-end ourselves. But also they have an OTT offering of Tennis Channel Plus where people actually can subscribe to tennis without having to deal with the cable company. Another example we have is Univision Deportes where we authenticated service with linear channels, VOD, catch-up TV. We offer that end-to-end to Univision for their 32 million subscribers. But also they have now Univision Now, which is a completely OTT service. So that's the hybrid. You go from cable to authenticated and then completely off the cable side. New Line, we power a lot of name brands, a lot of the professional leagues like the NFL, the NBA, MLS, soccer, and English Premier League and so forth in many countries, in 180 countries around the world. We do also this year, actually, I think I see Nick somewhere here. With Sony, we've been able to do the first 4K live games. If you've ever watched a 4K game, I think you'll be hooked on 4K forever. I am. So not just 4K, but we do the hybrid TV is basically you come from cable and broadcast into OTT, but I think for 4K is where it's actually starting more and more on the OTT side directly, and we're excited about offering that to our partners, but also to a lot of consumers out there.
And I recall you mentioning earlier that the 4K that you showed was also using HDR.
That's right. So so 4K, flavors of 4K. I think 4K would have the most impact when it's high dynamic range, which means that in dark scenes you can actually see much better, all the details. But also high frame rate for sports. If you're watching tennis or even golf, I think high frame rate gives you a lot better realism of picture and high picture quality. But also the studios are working on color gamut, expanded color gamuts and things like that would actually make 4K a great experience for consumers when it's really adopted on the content side.
Does the HDR add any more complexity to what you do, or it's just...
We actually process it. We've done at NAB 2 weeks ago. We've shown with Samsung, with Sony, with other CE manufacturers. There's a few flavors of HDR from few vendors, and actually the complexity is taken care of now in terms of processing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, great. Well, so when we have, and maybe we'll start with Scott here too on this, with all of these programming sources, and trying, as we talked about, trying to uncover and identify the ones you're interested in. What's being done to make it easier and for the consumer to find what they want? And are we ever going to get to the so-called nirvana of a unified program guide, for example?
So can I
start with Scott first?
Oh, I was gonna-
Well, because I gave him, I mentioned him first. So.
I'm going to give you a negative answer. So
Well, good. We like both answers. Okay. But maybe you have a negative answer too, but maybe you have a positive answer.
If it'll help. But,
Give it a shot.
Well, I think it all starts with the content when it's created and being able to attach the right kind of identification that's going to be able to follow it all through the various pipes it needs to travel through. You know, so being able to have that metadata in place, that no matter where that content shows up, you're able to track it, you're able to know who's viewing it, you're able to know where it's performing. If you're a consumer at home and you're trying to figure out which of the 19 different devices that I can watch on is going to show me Breaking Bad, or is going to show me the first 5 episodes of True Blood, or whatever it is that I want to find, you know, having all of those pieces and parts in place behind the scenes to make all of that accessible so that I can go seamlessly from one experience to the next is pretty much the most important piece, I think.
Okay, Robin, it's your turn.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, or maybe preempt a little bit, but, you know, we're all here, I think, on this panel trying to improve the experience, and I think we're all trying to and beginning to do a good job of it. However, we're against this other dynamic, which is the total fragmentation of devices and apps. And, you know, we used to joke about 500 channels and nothing on. Now it's not 500 apps, it's 2,000 apps and nothing on, because the average MVPD has at least a couple of apps sometimes, with different UIs, different look and feel. So while we're trying to fix this problem, and we are fixing this problem by sharing metadata and improving it and making, at the same time, other parts of the industry are going down all these silos. So we have to run fast to stay still, because, you know, we talked in the past about having to switch HDMI inputs. It's like switching 1,000 HDMI inputs for all these different apps, and none of them play nice. You know, they all start from zero. They forget where you were. They look different. They use different mouse buttons or clicker buttons or whatever. Anyway, so that was my kind of negative input to put a background to what everybody's trying to fix here. And we in Niagara are trying to fix it, but we can run as fast as we can, but we end up with, you know, 500 apps, and something is on, but it's hard to find it.
And even worse, you're gonna have different passwords and authentication processes for all that.
Yeah.
I have to keep a
And
book.
they forget the passwords too, some of them.
That's why I keep a book.
The motivations here are really the issues. And if you look at how we've arrived at this place where a consumer has a lot of choice, and some would argue probably too much choice at this point for the reasons we're just talking about here, I think the next major emergence that we're going to see, once a few of the media companies start to realize that a walled garden is not necessarily their best friend long-term, the emergence of the next generation of applications in this space are going to be applications that do a really good job of aggregating across all of these applications. It doesn't mean that those individual applications will necessarily go away, so the content creators will still have the power that they expect around the content that they own. But the consumer should have a choice of maybe 20 different applications that meet their needs of curation, discovery, and search, that they can have all of their subscriptions come into. So think of subscribing to 20 different services, and at the last phase of that approach, going through a wizard, would be, what application do you want to view this all in? TiVo? Do you want it on Comcast? Do you want it on something a third party has developed, because that is a navigation paradigm that you like? That's going to be the next thing that I think we see that makes this hybrid TV thing work, which is the next generation of aggregated apps. That's where we see it.
And so I guess Amazon has done some quasi-aggregated apps, at least in terms of the payment structure, that you could get all your different programmatics and you pay, you know, just directly through Amazon. But are they going beyond that to try to overcome some of the challenges that you've been talking about?
I think in what we're seeing with folks that are committed to a piece of hardware and to a service offering, the lines get a little blurred if you're actually the provider of the service as opposed to the aggregation platform. Your motivations, again, are different. If you're the one making money and you're going to try and promote your content ahead of that of others, that kind of goes in the face of what a consumer's really expecting, which is, give me a good discovery platform that's fair and balanced across all sources. And you can't necessarily expect a fair and balanced approach if you're one of the providers of the content. So we'll see.
I mean, the constants here are the, you know, hybrid is in the middle, or any medium it's really, there's a content that everybody wants to watch, right? That's really, content is king, as we said earlier, and all the time. And then there's a viewer who's trying to see the content. What's changing on both sides is that I think with Netflix, with some of the, you know, the tide has risen now that you expect to see your content on every device and everywhere. I mean, actually, early this week, I didn't know this, but I was on a JetBlue flight, and when you log into your Wi-Fi, it says if you have an Amazon Prime, subscription, you can actually log in and watch content while you're flying, which is great because I didn't know that you can watch video, from Netflix or Amazon. So when you have this expectation rising over the last few years for everyone almost around the world now, I think you have a different expectation that TV content has to be now ubiquitous everywhere. And that's what's making this hybrid TV model, becoming really a reality and move faster. And all of us, I think, need to catch up and be ahead of it to make sure that we can deliver that. Yeah.
But how are you all overcoming what was referenced before about the siloed approach of, some of the entrenched services out there that like to keep things to themselves and don't want to necessarily share nicely with others?
Well, I'll start with this. I mean, the experience is what we're describing, right? Same content, all different devices. But to deliver that, there's just a lot of complexity behind the scenes, right? So for example, the experience on iTunes for a particular movie and the expectations of metadata and the expectations of quality is completely different than, let's say, on a different service. Which means that, folks like us in the middle, many of us here, have to take care of all that and make sure that you're adhering to all the specs. There's no common specs to kind of do this. So that just means that a lot of work is happening behind the scenes, what the consumer doesn't need to see, but we need to kind of take care of it. It's not just about metadata. It's also about video formats. It's also about the speed at which content is getting to different platforms. Right. The amount of content, right? If you look at an MVPD platform, inherently, some of the smaller guys, they're limited by the amount of storage they have. When you start talking about some of the more cloud-based services, the library sizes are becoming so much deeper. So it's not that easy. It's not the same experience on all devices quite as yet. There's a lot of normalization kind of happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, the really tough part about this is if you go back to a term called old money follows old habits, follows, in this case, long entrenched business models that people just don't want to let go of yet. This is not a technical challenge for anybody up here. This is easy to solve, and every one of us could come up with 2 or 3 standards, if you will, to solve this, where all that content could plug in and we could do magic with it if we could just get over the old entrenched models, and they're not going to go away easily. So there may be more than just a hybrid experience. I think there needs to be a hybrid business model that kind of leads us to that next phase we get to. And it's starting to move right now. We're seeing the content owners loosen a little bit just in the last 6 months with the deals we've talked about. A year ago, none of us would have sat here and said, aside from what Charlie was doing with Sling, that we would see YouTube and Hulu and the Sony service coming the way we've seen it. So it's changing.
So let's go back to the FCC a little bit. Actually, I was, you pointed out, well, if we could come up with solutions, but how do we get them to work with us? And I don't think any of you are suggesting some government intervention to encourage it. But if not, then what other sort of incentives or inducements could be put on the table to try to, foster greater cooperation?
I mean, the bigger guys, right? I mean, the battle between HBO and Netflix is out there. It's well known. People subscribe to HBO now because they want to watch Game of Thrones. You need Netflix because all of your most of the content that you missed in the last 20 years is there, and you want to probably catch up on it. Would those guys work together? I don't think anybody sees that in the foreseeable future. And it ties back to the business models. I mean, people still have to make money. So the whole value chain of making money still needs to be there. And for us to have also a place in the ecosystem. And so, is there a collaboration, like for instance with Ubiquity? I mean, they do normalize a lot of things for a lot of these OTT services, and that's where you see maybe some commonality that people can let collaboration maybe. But the brands, I think it's just like the major leagues in sports. I mean, you're not going to see these guys, play nice together, I guess.
Right. I mean, if you looked at,
Sometime.
when we did some of this work at the FCC, I mean, it was sort of based on a technical level, but the theme that kept coming back to undermine the potential of what we discussed here was the positioning, the branding of not the individual programs, but the MVPD wants to have its Uber brand presented exactly. So if you try to unravel what's behind that, they must have done their calculations with some very clever people, presumably, that says they can get more money or more sticky or more something by doing that. So you got to reverse engineer that. So how can we keep them happy by substituting whatever that extra stickiness or value is by doing it another way? And I think that's it's a financial engineering exercise, business. As somebody said, it's not technical, it's business.
If we go back to some other lessons that we can take from the last 25, 30 years in this industry, if you think around the technical side of things, cable modems, doing voice over cable, we had Cable Labs setting standards on behalf of the industry to try and calm down the silliness that was happening in a very proprietary set of worlds. You said government. I think there are other entities that could be induced to come in and potentially set some standards that could be voluntary. And we've seen if you set a standard and it's voluntary and you choose not to go in that direction, it doesn't end well. So it does tend to entice people to it. So whether it's a Cable Labs or it's an NAB, something like that, working with the groups that are up here, a standard could be set that everybody could sign up to and contribute to and have at least some perception of ownership in the standard. That might be the only way we can get this done.
There have been, in standards efforts in the past, notoriously a few players, whether it was a Microsoft or an Apple or others, chose not to. And though I don't think it really hurt them. I mean, the way you was to make it sound that, well, if you have a large number, and if the consumers gravitate to those, then it might encourage it. But that's always been a bit of a challenge to be able to make that happen.
You get some big media companies out there that have survived not being part of the standard, at least on its face, for a long period of time, like you said with Apple. But if you look at pragmatically where they've landed, they're effectively playing by the same rules, one way or another. They chased Flash out of the business, but
Right.
What did they win?
It's a good question. If you could do one thing to improve the systems, and in terms of what you see, well, first of all, what do you think is the biggest problem today in creating a better experience?
It's disaggregation right now. Too many apps, too many silos, not enough applications of bringing it all together, and quite honestly, not enough curation of that content in one spot.
Other people?
I
What do you all
agree
think?
with that. It started that thread, but also on top of that, you've got this whole ad-supported mess. I mean, there's so much, so many attempts to rescue a broken ad-supported model, and OTT is just horrible. I mean, it's just the ads are just inserted in offensive ways in the wrong place, at the wrong time, repeated over and over. Inventory's all mixed up. So that's so negative, I think, to even a non-business person and somebody not in this business. It's just a total mess.
Yeah, I think the challenge also is finding, you have YouTube on one side where you can watch anything, there's billions of videos you can watch every day, and you got the pay TV guys who need to shift. So there's got to be in the middle, we don't know yet where it's going to be, where people are comfortable paying $7.99, $99, some amount of money to get what they want and can watch, but it's not going to be free. And it's not going to be $200 a month, to Comcast and Time Warner, and down the road. So the challenge is, where is that going to be, and how many skinny bundles, how many Hulu and Netflix subscription you're going to have to actually have your entertainment kind of world, that consumers can live with, in the future. It's finding that medium, I think that's the biggest challenge, because people are, one of the complaints, you hear it all the time now in the news is, people are shifting from the service to another service. This new service came up, people are dropping another service. So there's going to be this kind of shifting of viewing habits around hybrid TV, and hopefully we'll see an end to that at some point, and where things stabilize, the fragmentation will also get better. So I think that's the biggest challenge is everybody's engaged, but it's TBD where we're going to end up.
Any other comments there?
I always have a problem with the content licensing model. How do I find, I use New Line to watch hockey, that's my favorite sport. Can I find the game I want? I'm paying for this, I'm paying for that, I'm paying for that, and I get the blackout screen. I know it's the league's fault, but can I reach through the line to grab the commissioner of the NHL? No. I get mad, though, at the end of the season about the money I paid, and it can frustrate you to a point where you don't want to do it another season. And I think as well that if you get this, as we said, this intermediation of it all, once you sit down and start thinking about all those subscriptions, it adds up to your $200. What did you really save in all this? So that would be mine. I'm against it.
Damn it.
Well, good, we had another negative there. So, let's go into recommendations, because I know that's an area that's important to a number of you, and certainly it's important to consumers in deciding what else to watch. And are there any statistics about when recommendations are made? For example, when I have FiOS at home, so when I look at one channel or one program, especially when I'm using it on my DVR, and so I want to watch one show, and all of a sudden I'll get the images of a bunch of other programs that are similar. How many people, are there statistics on how many people actually jump to one of those recommended programs, and how frequently that is, or is it just sort of viewed as something on the screen that they tend to ignore? And I guess I should also ask the audience, but are there any stats that you're aware of?
I don't have any here, but I can tell you there's folks from Think Analytics and Ginny and Digital Smiths that'll have a
Right.
good war chest of stats that help them justify what they do. I don't think anybody here would argue that it clearly leads to more consumption, no question about it. But we've plateaued, we believe, as far as it's going to go, because they're too generic. When the same title is recommended against 30 new titles, the same to all of us, it's not going to hit every one of us the same way. There was a really good article that just hit in the last couple of days here about what Netflix has done specifically around poster art, and how the art of really understanding the right poster can drive consumer behavior
Right.
towards a click. And it's no different when it comes to recommendations. They have to be personalized, and they have to be curated now as well. So it's done a really good job in the early days of saying this matches this, but now this matches this for you matters more.
And from the network point of view, every click that you make is recorded, because it has to go back up the network in order to functionally do it. And so there is this enormous amount of analytics that could be tapped in. They try to say it's not going to be, oh, well, David did that again, but it will be recorded,
Right.
analyzed, and it's getting better and better down to a super granular level of where did they put that prompt on what part of the screen. They can track anything.
So from the audience side, because I was curious on, when you see recommendations of other programs, how many people might actually look at that other program 10% of the time? Okay, any more than 10% of the time? Okay, and so the others who didn't raise their hands at all, is it because you don't look at all, or you don't even see recommendations? Never see them. Okay, well,
They just don't like them being told what to do. Free spirits out there.
Rebels.
Yeah.
well, that's an interesting challenge, though, because, curation and recommendations are important, but if they're not being used as much, Or is it, or would you view 10% as a successful number?
Wait. Yes.
Hell yeah.
Okay.
Listen, if you're in the transactional business and you
Yeah.
get a 10%,
Return,
action,
yeah.
that's real impact on your bottom line.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So that's a better number than I thought.
And the other way it's measured, because I've seen some of the numbers, I don't remember what they are, but it relates to customer acquisition cost and anti-churn, and you can do some pretty quick maths there and get some pretty real value out of just anti-churn. It's pretty obvious when you got very high customer acquisition costs that anything that you do to reduce that is money back to the bottom line again.
Well, as we think about money back to the bottom line, you also got to think about the different business models, right? So, for example, I was saying transactional. The way licensing works is different terms for new releases and catalog. Well, let's just say if you surface recommendations that surface the right title from the catalog to people in the industry, in the ecosystem, right, and the service provider, that means real money.
Yeah.
So I think at some point it's recommendations balancing both what the consumer sees as well as the business models out here.
Mike, you had something to say?
Well, there's a
Okay.
really interesting comparative that you can probably do at home today, most of us could. Go to your pay TV provider, if you still have one, and look at the VOD shelf that you have, and it's likely going to start with new releases, and then it's going to be 4 or 5 other very predictable titles of shelves of content. And you'll consume a bit from that. Contrast that with what you see from Netflix, or if you've got access to an Android TV at home or Google Play. One of the best things I've seen lately, and it's around a digital asset, but it's music, is mood and time-based. Bring up Google Play, it'll know that I'm about to cook dinner. It'll know, here's some playlist based on I'm about to cook dinner, pick your genre, and within 3 clicks, I'm down to what I like around that time. And that's really driven my consumption of that set of digital assets through the roof. If I could have the same thing for video, kind of that context-aware, emotion, situational awareness, that those shelves that get built in my VOD environment are built for me right now, instead of it being the same across the whole damn territory, people are going to consume more.
Well, I think you see that if you use, I do YouTube Red, which is, anti-ads, but it's also got, I quite often gravitate to the recommendations as a starting point, because it's lazy, well, especially if you've got a smart TV clicker, you need
Right.
something really damn lazy, but it works.
It's a starting point,
It's
you're
a
right.
good starting point, actually, and I guess it's the same back end, probably, that you're talking about.
We've got new platforms like X1 and so on, not to poo-poo on their platform, but those things weren't built in there. I know they're coming, and this is going to get better for everybody. You're going to watch more video, sorry.
Do we have time to watch more video?
You'll find it.
Okay. How many people binge watch in this audience? More, and how many binge watch more than 3 different series in a year? Okay. A lot of binge watchers.
Don't you guys work?
Yeah, well, they're here today, so, but this is part of the work, to be here. I may have some more questions, but are there any questions from the audience that would like to be raised? And please identify yourself, Jim Berger.
It's interesting talking about where the set-top box is going, and I'm just curious, I've only read about it. Have any of you looked at the Xfinity partner platform, which is HTML5 based? Do you think that's the wave of the future, or is that just a defense against the FCC's set-top
So
boxes?
there's a little more subtle than that, I think, Jim. So that's RDK platform, which is an HTML5 browser running on a box, which is, arguably somewhat open as long as you're on Comcast or whoever licenses it. So it's very siloed again. If you look on the Comcast website in the last week or so, you will magically find a sort of a do-it-yourself spec for a rendering device. If you follow these rules, in theory, you should be able to manufacture a device that will connect itself to the Comcast network. I'm sure they missed out a few bits. Now, magically, that appeared about the same time as the NPRM appeared. So, but I would encourage people to go click. It's not that go click on the Comcast website, and it will tell you, HTTP, blah blah blah, connected this, DRM that, and maybe we can all try
And your insomnia will be cured.
And what are the advantages of going HTML5 approach?
Well, it's pretty ubiquitous.
Self-rested.
It's
Right.
way of describing the screen these days for video and metadata and anything in between.
But do a lot of the services, I mean, you know, we talked about the silos before, and they like their own presentation, you know, in their app version and what have
They
you.
all use it. So it's, if you think of it, I mean, even an app.
Because it is like an app, it's HTML5 type of app.
An app, it doesn't appear to be a browser because, you know, it sounds like a browser, but it could be a web app, which is a browser in disguise. You know, you don't have the bars, you have no options other than what you're told to do, but that's the plumbing behind most modern user interfaces.
The biggest problem we see with HTML5 approach, you know, Comcast has put a set of wrappers around it that control it and tighten it up and make it secure. If you look at this discussion we're having around hybrid, that hybrid would somewhat lead you to believe that that is some web content or third-party content coming across the internet, which is much harder to integrate and roll together in an HTML5 environment than you would with a native environment. You know, our company spent 5 years building an HTML5 environment thinking we're going to write it once and it's going to run everywhere. And it does technically do that. The challenges are performance and having native applications that are hooked tightly to the security that a lot of these guys are going to want are a little light when it comes to HTML5 and bringing the third-party content together. And we've got a project underway with one of the X1 licensees right now, and it's the exact same platform, and they're allowed to play with fonts and colors.
Yeah, well, there was, on the FCC, there was a suggestion, let's just say, that you can use EME, which is encrypted media extensions, which is part of HTML5. And I think Comcast, actually Comcast submitted that idea. Now, that one sort of begins to work, except W3C is nowhere near finished and said they don't even want to deal with this until the next round, and God knows, an unknown number of years. And it's kind of locked in. If you use PlayReady, you know, Microsoft's DRM, then you must use Microsoft's browser. And if you use the Google Chrome, you must use Whitevine. And okay, and that in itself, it seems like innocuous enough. But when you start looking at all the other dependencies, you start thinking, gosh, I'm going to have to dictate to my viewer which browser I use based on what DRM I use. Now, there's a way out which is called multi-DRM, where you do many DRMs, and we, you know, behind the scenes, with a lot of complexity, fake it for the consumer, so they think that it's all the same, but actually we're kind of moving things. So there's things going on there, but I think it's not quite mature enough.
That's it though. I mean, we are right in the middle of a bunch of those deployments right now where you have to mask that complexity from a consumer perspective.
Yeah.
For them, it's as simple as I go to a browser or I go to a native app, I'll start playing something, it should just work. Behind the scenes, different formats, different DRMs take care of that.
Okay, another question. Please, Josette, please identify yourself.
Josette Pont with the USCCTM. So I have both an observation and a question for the panel. So basically, with the recommendations and engines and the customization trends that you're talking about, which is absolutely fundamental to the future as I see it, but how do you reconcile some of the comments that you make about the absolute need for ubiquitousness of content and the fact that the high-value content is more and more subject to holdbacks in licensing agreements because of the sheer cost that it takes to produce this content. And because, as Dr. Cimini aptly pointed out, you know, there has to be a business model that works, where every single player in the value chain gets remunerated. Otherwise, the whole equation falls apart. So, well, I'm a very strong believer in customization and discovery engines. How do you reconcile those two?
That's a really good question. I think the answer is this group doesn't. Those rights are going to move in the directions they're going to move. And again, we've said they're starting to soften, which is encouraging. That could be stopped at any point. Our job is to say, this is what's available, this is what's coming in the top, and then put the layer of control and customization under that. We really can't influence one way or another what comes into the top of the funnel. We can, however, dictate what we've got and how it comes out the bottom. I think if we put some intelligence around how easy it is for the content owners to get their content in the top of that funnel, that may help loosen some of the rights restrictions and windowing that we're seeing that's very restrictive right now. That's the hope. But again, if I was to say anything in the last 6 to 8 months that there's a term there, it's encouraging. It's starting to move. So our job is to work with what we're given and do a really good job of presenting it to the customer in the best way possible. You know, if we don't have a lot to work with, we don't have a lot to work with, and that's kind of where we were a year ago, but it's better now.
Any?
I think the question, like Sling TV, for instance, you know, which is if you're a DirecTV subscriber, I mean, if you're a Dish subscriber, you're like in the $100 range for the satellite service. But if you're a Sling TV, you're like $19.99, $29.99. Are they losing money there? Are they? We don't know. We'll see over time how they can sustain that, especially if their viewership or subscription rate, you know, people are subscribing goes to 2, 3, 4, 5 million, hopefully, you know, because it's good for the consumer. I think it will, that dynamic has to play out to see if they can actually make the economics work for them. Because I'm sure it's cheaper, maybe it's cheaper to do it over the top than the satellite. Maybe satellites are amortized. We don't know how nobody knows how these guys think, right? And I think over time the efficiency will work itself out to the system. I mean, you can't just artificially make money, right? I mean, that's kind of the whole argument of paying $10 for your set-top box a month to rent it from Time Warner Cable. I mean, people that's what the millennials don't like. I'm not going to pay you $30 for the equipment, and then it's something I don't even watch. So I think if you look at where, you know, the X1 discussion, and then the skinny bundle, those over the next couple of years, you know, maybe 2 to 5 years, all those economics will work themselves out, and then we'll find what really works. Because if I can have a skinny bundle that has all my channels and has VOD, and I have Netflix and whatever other services, and it's all under $50, I think even millennials will subscribe to a skinny bundle, maybe, you know, once they start making a little bit more money and so forth. But I think we're in the middle of that right now. And when I hear about Comcast trying to do HTML5, and you can build any app on their set-top box, I mean, really? I don't want the set-top box. I mean, that's really the whole premise of this discussion is no one wants the set-top box in their living room because the thing hogs a lot of power, takes a lot of money from you every month. So I think we'll see how that works out. And by the way, this whole discussion about cable companies, it's a really mostly U.S. phenomenon. You go out to Europe and other places, it's not a problem. You know, people are already moved to OTT more than, you know. So I think, we're just in the middle of this discussion, but it will work. I'm very happy to see the Sling TV thing, and I'm actually a subscriber because I just want to use it every day and see how it works. It does work, you know. It's not the greatest experience yet, but eventually they'll work. I mean, there's updates already coming in every few weeks, few months. But I mean, looking at it now, I think that's the dynamic where they just have to make a little bit less money and let these new business models kind of take shape, because, yeah.
This gentleman first, and then we'll let Rajan identify himself, but you go first.
Thanks. Dave Hutchinson. This is directed to you, Mike, but anybody else can jump in. Regarding back-end standards and metadata management for content, you mentioned briefly Cable Labs. I thought IDER was getting some traction, at least with the major studios, in that regard. Is that not getting as much traction as we thought?
No, I think it is. I think what's complicating that a little bit is IDER's in a nice closed environment. It's very, very definable. Now we're seeing these content sources coming from so many different directions. If we could take that and, you know, write a layer that took the garbage we got from the web stuff and turn it into IDER, that'd be perfect. Because then we would have everything meeting a spec again. And that allows everybody up here to do their jobs a lot easier, from building user experiences to apps to presentation frameworks and recommendations. So, yeah.
Another question.
But how do you do Jamile's point about $50, right? So how do you replace that value that goes from $100 a month down to 50? And where does that just disappear? And how does that affect the whole ecosystem? How do you replace that? Even if it's
We replace that, I mean, you mean replacing that for the cable company?
no, to anybody, to the whole ecosystem.
Yeah.
That money funds.
Yeah, well, I think there's some inefficiencies in that $100 that people don't like, and buying an Apple TV or a Amazon Fire box for $100, putting it under your TV, it's not like having a set-top box in your home for 25 years, paying $10 a month. That's a lot of money. So the cost of electronics is much better than what it was. So I think I don't know how they will do it, but I know that content, for instance, I mean, the advent of Netflix by itself, I mean, if you were 15 years ago saying, oh, somebody would actually license a lot of content and put all of it for $7.99 a month, people would say you're crazy. Nobody will do that. But that happened, and now we're in this new era where, it's all you can eat for less than $10.
But it's also new business models that are coming out, right? So my kids, beginning of the month, they buy a whole series of TV shows, right, on Amazon. Beginning of the month, $35, $26, whatever that might be, right? That's an ownership model. It's in the locker, but that's more money going out of my pocket. I mean, so what other new business models like this are coming out that are getting some of that back into the ecosystem?
Yeah, this money's got to be given back somewhere, you're right. You got a $50 gap in your example, where's that going to come from? If I were an MCN right now, I'd be very concerned, because that money is going to likely come out of the channels that really, quite honestly, have no business existing today. Let's be honest, there's a bunch of garbage out there that is tied to MCN's bundling, and God love them, they got away with it and they were able to sell it that way. That's going to change, and I think they're going to be probably one of the biggest losers in this early change. It's not a popular opinion, and I do business with some of those guys, but it's true.
I'd probably better to call it niche content than garbage, though.
I'll write that down, David.
Okay. Crappy niche content, more questions, gentlemen here, please identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Vlad Natinsky with Premier League Consulting. I've got a slightly broad question for you guys. There's been a lot of talk here about the set-top box going away, how it's not needed. I was at a similar conference in the UK a few months back, where there's a lot of talk of set-top boxes becoming the centre of the IoT home hub, organising home automation, essentially being hooked onto your broadband. Everything you do through broadband, you come through that set-top box, and you get TV as well. Do you see that as grasping at straws, or do you see that as a potential way forward?
Well, I think interesting observation and different viewpoints. I think it's my cynical view would be there's conferences here in the U.S. which are attended mostly by cable companies, and they would probably have presented that same scenario that you saw in the UK. So I don't think it's necessarily geographical. I think it's whoever's already in the house who has that HDMI 1, basically, would like to use that and sell security services. And well, the cable guys have already sold voice over IP for the last 15 years. So they're trying to add revenue and add stickiness. So it's an attempt to fight back. Now, will they lose in the end? I think, based on what we've been saying here, probably ultimately, but they're trying to fight back. I think that's what you're seeing, basically.
And this is the IoT question about ecosystems. So if you bring in a fiber now, let's say Verizon, my company makes a residential gateway that taps into that fiber. If this is not your normal modem that you buy at Fry's or at some electronics store, it's designed for the task of providing enough bandwidth for all these various devices with a firmware layer that goes back up into the system so that you can turn things on and off or monitor. And if it's AT&T or Verizon, they're already service providers and television providers. So it's not a great leap if you have a bunch of smart TVs in your house that you're just making them all wireless. It's great.
So maybe the set-top boxes don't exist, but it just might be set-top boxes.
It'll be a box that's setting someplace.
Right, so what this the example you were talking about in the UK was not that each set-top box would be dedicated to each TV. It'd be more like the cable modem with the Wi-Fi that's centralized and
A lot
then,
of the talk is actually
okay.
what's happening in the US, so it's like Time Warner
Right.
Cable, you can get home automation that does your that does its-
So it's a box, but not necessarily a set-top box.
Well, I mean, they
Makes
would
sense.
call it set-top box feature.
It's a gateway.
It's
Yeah.
a gateway, more
got-
like Wi-Fi.
Processing power on the side of your house and what that processor's doing at any given time, all these services look the same to the box. Whether it's, home automation, it's security systems, it's TV service, it's whatever. That box doesn't care. It's a set of inputs and a set of outputs, and you're just simply moving intelligence and processing to a certain spot in the house. That box can do it all. They're all the same now.
And realistically, this is a set-top box.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I do screen mirroring for my television.
Yeah.
It's sitting there plugged in because we'll use a lot of juice. But then
Gentleman over there, please identify yourself.
My name is Jason Henderson from Dish Network. And my question about set-top boxes, though, is that, and I don't mean this to challenge in particular, but one thing that I did want to challenge.
Come on, challenge.
Okay.
we won't touch on it.
Robin will handle any question you ask.
So the gentleman is absolutely correct that $10 a month over 10 years is very expensive. On the other hand, I don't know how long a Roku is supposed to last, but I'll bet you that you're going to change it out every couple of years. I also know that right now, I own a Roku on 2 different TVs and they can't talk to one another, which is something that set-top boxes typically do. My set-top box has a DVR on it. Typically right now, if I want to buy one of the mini set-top boxes that we're not calling set-top boxes, I still have to buy a DVR to go with it. I have to kludge together a solution, and then I think to myself, gosh, what if I created a service that could just sell me a solution? In other words, you may end up killing the set-top boxes, and then I guarantee you within a decade, they're going to come up again. Because somebody will go, gosh, if only somebody would lease me the equipment, so I can pay $10 a month. So I'll buy it all.
And is your set-top box with DVR $10 a month?
I actually don't recall the month. Not-
You work for Dish. I'm teasing. I'm kidding about that. I can tell you that my whole home DVR,
Set-top box today.
my whole home DVR set-top box from Fios, I think is around $40 a month. And it makes me wonder with all the VOD content I have, why I still have that. But actually, I find it convenient to know that I've got programming that I just have there. So,
Well, there might be a great opportunity in merchandising a smart DVR to people so they can build an OTT setup. But right now, it's really like building your own car. I mean, people just aren't doing it yet.
Yeah, I think there's a step function in here where you're gonna have some folks that'll say, look, I'm happy-ish paying $200 a month for my multi-channel TV service, because I don't have time to do it any other way, and it's a matter of convenience and time, and I can just eat that. That could come back to the set-top box. You're gonna have some people on each camp where some of the cord cutters are willing to go and do some pretty incredible stuff to get their stuff for free. I've seen it. It's like, how much time did you invest not being a technical person to get what you've got here? And it's months of their life, and they're tweaking it at night, and they're going, ha, I saved a nickel. And that's good. That's good. There's nothing wrong with that. But we're going to get to a point here, I think, where we've got hosted network DVRs, where some of that functionality goes up into the cloud. Bandwidth is becoming cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Love them or hate them, our friends at Google are pushing some of the other providers around the country to do a better and better job. A year ago in Denver, I was happy to have 50 megabits a second on my cable modem. I have a gig coming to me now on a cable modem. And I'm not paying any more for it, by the way. So that's going to change some of the models, but you're right. Getting a Hopper and a set of Joeys and paying monthly for it is easier, and I have them. And I'm a cord everything because I have to be. We were at a panel, Mark's earlier today, and he's asking who has what for devices, and everybody's hands were going up. It's like, you guys all have 10 devices at home, and we do, because we're in the business. But if you had to choose, you'd probably have both for a while, I think.
And a lot of them are legacy.
Yep.
Any other
I think I agree, you're paying for the convenience, and that's, maybe 5 years from now, we'll miss that convenience, I agree. I think it's just expensive, for us, it's probably, but for a younger generation, it's too expensive, for them to just go into a $200 monthly bill or 100, you know, so that that will change probably. Hopefully these devices also become smarter with some network DVR or cloud DVR. So some things will happen. But I agree with you. We're paying for convenience today, and the feeling is that we're paying too much.
And that's this group. That's not the
Yeah.
millennials
No.
either.
Yeah.
It's-
Additional questions? Mark, please identify yourself.
Yes, Mark Donegan. So a question for Robin on this whole set-top box discussion. So NAGRA provides conditional access. Conditional access is in almost, if not every set-top box, and it's required. It's not there because it's required. Now, I also have hardware experience, Mike knows that. NAGRA doesn't run on these low-cost chipsets, or, you're not there. So my question is, is there a conditional access approach, technique that will be ported to these low-cost devices?
Yeah,
Is that requirement going away?
No, it hasn't gone away.
How are we gonna deal with that?
I think
Because
it's,
that's not talked about.
actually, as we said earlier on this panel, I think the technology, we can all solve these, and that one is already being solved, and we actually do. There's things called TEs, trusted execution environments. There's a lot of secure silicon stuff. We're putting that in Samsung and other TVs now, so it's all embedded in there. The equivalent to essentially what would have been inside a smart card is already buried inside the silicon by default in many cases. So I think that's actually taken care of. That used to be, a lot of the plumbing stuff we talk about here used to be the bottleneck. I think it's still a challenge, but I think jointly can fix the technology stuff. We can fix the security stuff. We can find the leaks. But I think we're held back by some of the business relationships which are mostly beyond our control here. Yeah.
Additional questions? I thought I saw a gentleman in the back.
Andrew at Yale. Do you think recommendations convert better for certain demographics?
Good question. Scott, do you have an answer for that? You want to make one up?
I keep sitting here and it feels like we're talking about a very specific older demographic with all the conversation around set tops and things like that. And I kept thinking how this all plays if you're 25 or under or something like that. And I don't have a great sense at the moment of how millennials and pre-millennials use recommendations, if it's something that they really require. I think they're very savvy in a very different way. They use YouTube as a primary source. They're not going to Comcast or somebody like that. GraceNote, we're developing a digital first product right now that will help try and bring some order to the chaos, and I think recommendations sort of fall into that. But there's got to be a way to lead people by the hand to get them to the next step in what they want to view. But I'm not sure if recommendations, the way they currently exist, will be the way that millennials consume it in 2 years, 5 years, whatever that looks like.
I totally agree with that. It's the recommendations the way they are now are a one-to-many approach, but it's the same for everybody. The recommendations are based on title predominantly today. So if I'm looking at a title, Robin's looking at the same title, you're looking at the same title, it doesn't matter where we are, what time of day it is, we're going to get the same list of stuff, and it's going to miss most of us. It's predominantly built for this group, quite honestly, the way these algorithms have been built. If you go to YouTube today and find an asset, it's hard to actually, for all of us to find the same thing. Let's say we picked a title, we all found the same asset. I will guarantee you that everything that's on the right-hand side that's been recommended as similar will be wildly different for each of us, based on what Google knows analytically about each of us. And it's time of day, it's geolocation, it's how we've interacted with everything we've done from our browser to YouTube. So your question, recommendations don't really matter anymore. Personalization does. And they're kind of a combination of the two. Getting a millennial to a starting point, which I think Robin mentioned earlier, that seems to be more important for younger demographics than it does for us. we'll just look at a screen and go, yeah, there's something on there I like, and away we go. It's sad, really, but millennials set and earlier need a place to start their experience. That may have been some outside stimulus that we don't know about, but predominantly it's some kind of media entertainment stimulus. They've listened to some music, they browsed a particular website. That all rolls up into that starting point, and where it takes you is your journey. It's different for all of us, so it has to be.
I think also there's a really strong social layer that needs to be folded in here, whether it's recommendations from your friends or finding out what people at your school are also into or that sort of thing, and that's a big equation that needs to be solved, right?
I think that's what's good. The other thing to remember is recommendations are in one particular service, right? So I got a 15-year-old at home, and magically, she knows exactly what to watch, right, across different services. Something is on Hulu, something is on Amazon, something might be on Xfinity with my TVE account. You know, it's there's no recommendation service that goes across all these. So is that all word of mouth, and they know exactly what to find, and they know exactly what's where?
Yeah.
So we're running out of time. In fact, I think we ran out of time. But before we leave, and I know you all want to stay longer, but before we leave, when we do this again a year from now, what's going to be different? And I know it could be a depressing answer, but be honest here.
I think.
Victor will still be here.
Well, I think I liked a lot Mike's observation, and I think I agree with it. You know, that even though the content, agreements are on 3-5 year cycles, they're getting a lot more future proof now, a lot more, and people are experimenting more, and maybe those experiments will stick. That gosh, it wasn't such a bad thing to give away all these other use case rights. Gosh, we actually sold more product as opposed to less. I think that's really happening.
This stuff started 10 years ago. People don't realize. 10 years ago, when IPTV was hitting its stride, people went back and said, the next time I license content, I'm going to license it for all these devices. And it started, and this is the content owners buying shows. They bought them for multi-DMAs, they bought them for different languages, different regions. They were never doing that before because they had a defined bubble of where their antennas could, where their broadcast towers could reach. This started a long time ago, so we're seeing the results now.
You're also seeing ad agencies becoming a little more savvy about the way the budgets and follow the money again. If there's money to be there, the content and the motivation will be to chase the money.
Maybe hopefully they'll address what Robin said before on the over-the-top side for ads and not seeing the same ones over and over again that may not be relevant to
The
you.
ad thing, again, comes back to HTML5.
Right.
It had to mature well enough that an ad agency would create their content to work across all those resolution levels. And that's coming.
Anybody else want to comment before we say goodbye? Well, I guess please join me in thanking our panel today, and I want to thank all of you for your participation as well. Enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of Digital Hollywood. Take care.